Welcome back.
Is that how we're starting? Welcome back to the second season of In the Company of Charity.
Welcome back.
Awesome welcome back. The best podcast of the Daughters of Charity ever, as we always say. It's our claim to fame.
It is the only podcast of the Daughters of Charity.
Doesn't matter.
Well, we are back and we are better than ever, guys. You thought you were rid of us, but it's not happening.
No, we had the whole summer to perfect. And
Sister
we
Elizabeth,
are ready to go.
I am so happy that you are here and I am here together here.
Yeah, Sister Liz, it's really good to be back on the podcast with you.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to say about your summer? How was it? And
my summer was really pretty good. I spent a lot of time working with some of the kids and the children in our neighborhood. And those of you who know me know I'm not particularly a kid magnet. I'm not. It's just the way it is, But I handle myself. So we did putt golf, miniature golf, which was hysterical.
Trying to imagine you doing that.
I actually was pretty good at teaching kids how to do that. So nobody got hit with a club or a ball. So that was good. We had a birthday party for 3 little girls who were turning 3 for their first birthday ever in the United States. So we had a couple of little meltdowns, as you would normally expect with 3-year-olds, and 20 other people who also have not really experienced birthday parties before. So we had the whole thing, gifts and cake and ice cream and
a true American experience.
It was, and it was hysterical and it was fun. And so we just kind of did things like that. Just spent a lot of time with little ones for the summer, which was delightful and scary. And I'm ready for them all to go back to school.
School, daycare, just go.
Yeah, wherever they go. And then we can spend some real quality time with their moms too, because, it's kind of hard to spend time with them when you're working with the kids. But summer is for kids, and that's what we did. So how about you? No one got locked in the elevators? Those of you who may have heard our host chat closing out season 1. We were concerned about elevator.
But the funniest thing is that the elevator has its own phone line. So if someone does get stuck, you can call them in the elevator and it automatically answers.
Uh-huh.
The thing about that is if someone out there in the community dials that number by accident, it will go into the elevator. So we've had some experiences of people just being in the elevator, going from one floor to the other, and randomly a phone call comes in and says, "Oh, hello,"
They just accidentally misdial and it just happens to be your elevator?
Yes.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But I have to say, I was thinking about you in your elevator because did you hear the story about the Holy Father? Got stuck in the elevator. He was 25 minutes late for his Wednesday audience. I think it was just, they were waiting for the Angelus or something. And he came out and apologized that he was stuck in the elevator. It took them 25 minutes to get him out. I mean, it's not funny, but I was thinking about you and I thought Liz could have got him out.
I know how to get someone out.
You do. I thought, well, and of course we know our sisters are there. And so I thought, well, Sister Liz could have got the Pope out of the elevator, maybe in record time. I don't know.
It could be. We are in our new building. We're very happy to be there. And
it's great.
Everyone just walks in and is just blown away. Proyecto Juan Diego. If you haven't seen our open house video, there's several out there, and it's really nice.
Well, that's pretty cool. That's exciting. That's exciting. I'm glad that happened. And we'll be looking forward to hearing more about that as our new season progresses.
Season 2.
So, season 2. This is absolutely season 2, and we're starting it. I guess now this is the tradition to begin the podcast, the new season of the podcast, on the week of the feast of St. Vincent de Paul, our spiritual and charismatic father. right?
Beautiful.
Beautiful, yeah. And so September 27th is the feast of St. Vincent de Paul. And so we are so delighted. I am particularly delighted to have our first episode be of Mark McGreevy, who works with Depaul International and a number of other Vincentian family projects. And it's a great interview with him. He is just such an amazing human being, and I think in many ways kind of channels St. Vincent de Paul into the 20th century. Just he's just amazing.
Yeah, it was a real gift. I know when we did this interview, I got to just be a fly on the wall, and that was really fun to listen to him, and not just his accent, because his accent is great, but he also just has so much wisdom and stories, and it's a good example of the lay people who are such a part of our family in the Vincentian family. And, they're doing some amazing work through Depaul International.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the initiative toward eradicating homelessness, Global Homeless Alliance. And so it's just the episode is packed with just, I think, really, really amazing insights into the Vincentian charism and how it's lived in different parts of the family through the Daughters of Charity, through our lay volunteers, and the other members of the family that we all call St. Vincent our father, our spiritual father, and that's an awesome thing. So I think we just let Mark tell his story and get this started.
Yes, we hope you guys enjoy it.
So welcome to In the Company of Charity. This is Sister Elizabeth, and I am in the great company of Mark McGreevy, who is a friend of mine. I met Mark when I was working for Depaul USA, and he was the group leader. Is that
group chief executive?
Group chief executive of Depaul International. Right. It's just a delight to see you. I wasn't sure when I was going to get to see you again, so it's just a delight to see you. And I was hoping that in this conversation you can tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the Vincentian charism. Where did Depaul International come from, and where has it gone since years ago when you first got started?
Okay, and well, it's a delight to see you again as well. But let's go back to the beginnings. I mean, this is a good time to speak because actually this year is the 30th anniversary of Depaul International.
Wow.
So, I mean, for me, it all started 33 years ago. The Daughters of Charity were a much bigger community at that time, but they managed something called the Passage Day Centre, which was a day centre for homeless people. At that point in time, around about 300 men and women a day were coming through the doors here. So I wandered round and met up with this wonderful, slightly scary sister called Sister Barbara Smith, who is the.
I can't imagine a dog is scary.
I think she had real gravitas, and when you're a young man, that quite frightened you.
Yes.
Anyway, we came round, and Barbara was lovely. She took me around the passage to see what was going on, and then said, "Would you like to do some volunteering?" So I said, "Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to do something." So before school, 2 or 3 times a week, I'd get up at around about 5:30, 6, come round, and with the team of volunteers, we'd put the ovens on, we'd get the food ready, we'd get the food stations up, and then people would come in off the streets for breakfast. We'd serve breakfast, chat to some of the guys and some of the women that were there, and then we'd leave and go back, and then I'd teach, do my day's teaching. And after a while, it was clear that actually the thing that I think gave me life was more the work with homeless people than it was teaching. And although I love teaching, but there was something about homelessness that I found absolutely fascinating, and some of the stories that I heard were so moving that I wanted to get involved in it. I also, it should be said, married the daughter of the headmaster of the school, so I had to get out there as fast as I could. Anyway.
Yeah.
And so they offered me a job here at the Passage, and I came. I didn't work for a long time. I worked for a month, 2 months here, and then there was a new centre being opened called the Cardinal Hume Centre, working with homeless young people.
He was an amazing person.
Well, he was somebody who, in a time politically that we had lots of changes to our welfare system over here, and the consequence of that was that for maybe some not thought through rationale, it wasn't deliberate. I think it was deliberate on the part of politicians, but it did lead to a rapid rise in homelessness. Cardinal Hume was one of those kind of figures who really challenged that. He used to always say, when we talk about blessed are the peacekeepers, and we used to go through those beatitudes, he'd always end up by saying, and blessed are the homeless, because they're the people who live outside my door every day. And as a direct political challenge to government once, when no shelter was available, he actually opened the doors of the cathedral itself and said, if I don't want these people to be outside, so come and live in here. And I found those kind of actions very moving, and in a way, that's the Vincentian family, isn't it? I mean, the Vincentian family is not just a series of platitudes or lobbying positions or advocacy statements. It's actually how you turn that into something that really makes a practical difference, and then speaking as an advocate on behalf of that experience of poverty. So for me, that's always been the draw of the Vincentian family in what we do. Anyway, I was very happy at the Cardinal Hume Centre, worked with young people on the streets with drug and alcohol problems, but we had this rise in homelessness across the UK during the late 80s, and the Passage itself, as a day centre with 300 people a day, the profile of the users changed quite dramatically, and we had, rather than people in their 40s or 50s, older people, men usually, maybe with alcohol or mental health problems, all of a sudden within an 18-month to 2-year period we saw this rise for the first time since Dickensian England, so for the first time in 100 years, this rise of youth homelessness, people actually 16 through to 25 becoming part of the profile group here at the Passage.
And it's a very different population.
Very different population to manage,
different needs.
and the problem was that in this integration with the older client group, they were learning bad habits pretty quickly.
Yes,
and so people weren't passing through this stage of homelessness; they were staying on the streets, and we had a growth of youth homelessness. And Sister Barbara, my heroine altogether, as usual, said, "Well, let's not talk about it; let's do something about it." And was thinking about creating a junior passage for these, and then one of her workers, a good friend of mine called Bill Broderick, helped to write a paper that suggested it wasn't so much a day centre that we needed something that took these young people off the streets. So Sister Barbara worked with Cardinal Basil Hume, worked with the Daughters of Charity, and said, let's try and build a Vincentian coalition to do something about this problem of youth homelessness. And the Society of St Vincent de Paul came along. They made a donation significantly in both finance and personnel. The Daughters of Charity in the UK and Wales came along and made a donation of money and of personnel, and then the Passage Day Centre itself came together. So in its origin, the charity that I work for now began then. So it was called Depaul Trust back in 1989. That was the name of the first charity. And in a sense, we talk about the Vincentian family. This was actually the Vincentian family in action very early in the use of that phrase. So they came together to create Depaul. Sister Sarah King Turner, who was a Daughter of Charity, came in as the director at that point, another heroine of mine. And then from there, they came over across the Cardinal Hume Centre and said, would I be interested in joining? So had my interview in 1989, joined Depaul, and then we began ostensibly to be honest with you, me thinking that this was going to be a 3-year commitment at most, and then I'd go off and get a proper job like be an accountant or a lawyer or do something.
You should have known.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. You can never escape the Vincentians.
No, you can't.
Once you carry into them, really. But we began our work in a very simple way, and the Daughters of Charity had a old convent building out in Willesden in the north of London. It was then housing mother and babies that were homeless, but it was in a state of disrepair. It was falling apart, but we couldn't find anywhere to begin our work, so that's where we began. And in 1990, Princess Diana came along in 1990, and we opened the doors of our shelter, and she was there at the launch, and it was a very significant moment. As I say, this was a Vincentian partnership creating something that was a practical response to a real-term problem, which was great in itself, but it also found a new way of expressing the charism. So prior to Depaul Trust being created in London, if a person wanted to enter a homeless shelter, they had to pass an interview, and you had to be clean of drugs, you had to be clean of alcohol, you had to have not had a history of violent crime. So people were stuck on the streets.
I was going to say, who can pass that kind of a test?
They were stuck on the streets because they were. Anyway, we came up with a new thing called low threshold. It was called at that time. So literally, there are no rules here, or very few rules. And the first thing that we used to say was, look, if you're on the streets, then you qualify. There is no interview. You come in, and then we start doing the interviews after you come in. There's this Vincentian phrase that gets used all the time called non-judgmental, and I slightly balk at it. It's not something, because I am the most judgmental person you'll ever meet in a million years. But I think at the point where you encounter people in need, you have to suspend all judgments. You can't make judgments about where they've come from, what's happened to them. You just have to accept that they're in that position. However, once they come in and you learn their story, then I think you can be as judgmental as you want to be.
Right.
Because I want people to be off drugs, I want people to be off alcohol, I want them to be happy, I want them to reintegrate with society. There's me making a series of judgments. And I like to think that Depaul, over the last 30 years, has never lost that spirit of being non-judgmental at the point where it meets people, very easy to access, and then afterwards really building out of that to get people integrated back into society.
And that is such a, I think, anyone who touches Depaul International sees that initially. I know when I first was invited to consider working with Chuck Levesque through Depaul USA, which was just beginning at the time, that sense of being non-judgmental and just meeting people where they are at, just saying you are the product of something, a system, a culture, a family, that we can't judge why you are in the situation that you're in, but we can work on helping you to become the fullest person that you were intended to be, had all of these things not maybe interrupted that process. And I just can remember that feeling like that just spoke to me as a daughter of charity. And thinking a lot too, this always reminds me of the story of Frederick Ozanam and Rosalie Rondeau, the sense that anytime you touch this charism, it incarnates itself. Like you said, it's not something that's necessarily going to stay in your head, or it's not going to be a policy. It immediately becomes incarnated in the people that you see and the people that you work with. So I just love, as you tell the story, and kind of having heard pieces of this before, that's so much a part of where Depaul came from.
Yeah.
That's the root of it. And so you started in the UK. We started here.
We started in the UK, and we managed, at the time when we began this, we were a really ragbag bunch of people. There wasn't such a thing as a career in homelessness.
Yeah.
That didn't exist. So we were largely a mixture of some Daughters of Charity, some SVP members, youth workers who translated over, a couple of social workers, a couple of retired people, and we built out of that. But the thing you find about this, isn't it, when you get in the work, is that, and especially this Vincentian charism, is it attracts real talent. And the reason I think it does this is there's a Monsignor called Monsignor Gilby, who came from a family that used to produce gin. In fact, they had a very successful distillery, and as a consequence of that, the family had a lot of money, and every year I used to get called to pick up a cheque for the charity. And I remember his obituary when he was talking about the ways in which our vocation grows, and he said, some people are by nature quite spiritual. They like to be reflective and sit in a room, and over time as they reflect, they're called to action. And some people are called to action and do things, and over the time as they reflect on that, they become spiritual by their very nature. And I think that one of the things about the Vincentian charism is that, especially for young people, that bit about doing something and then spending time reflecting on it leads to that sense of a spirituality based in action. Hugh O'Donnell speaks about this most beautifully, I think, of all the Vincentians I've ever met in my time. But yes, we began with all of the talent that we had. We quickly expanded into many other cities across the UK, across England and Wales, and then we became known to be experts in youth homelessness. We started to become slightly expert in areas of addiction, certainly in working with people who were difficult and abandoned by other agencies. And we were invited to go over to Ireland to do a review of the works of the Society of St Vincent de Paul in Ireland, or I was. And I went over there with my family, with my wife, and my daughter was only 2 at the time, and we landed in Dublin, and they were the largest provider of homeless services in Ireland. So I went and did a review of what they did. And some were good and some were bad, if I'm honest with you. But the intention was there to make them better, and so it was a very positive time for me. But on the last day, 3 days before Christmas, 2 young people died of hypothermia on the Liffey. Both of them were heroin addicts, 16 years old. And it was exactly the same story as it had been in England 10 years previously, which was that if you had an addiction, if you took drink, then you couldn't access services. But the politicians over there said, no, this can never happen again. What can we do? So they asked me to write a strategy for Ireland around cold weather provision. How would you bring people inside to prevent people dying on the streets? Which we did, and then I happily left, didn't think about it at all, came back to my job. In the June of that year, they rang and said, we've put it out to tender to all of the agencies working within Ireland, but nobody will do it because the risks are so big. What would happen if a member of staff got a needle stick injury and contracted AIDS, or what would happen if there was drug dealing on the premises? Who would be liable? So what would happen if these behaviours cause an assault on staff? And all of those are, by the way, really, really reasonable, good questions to ask, but it's not where we would start with our series of questions. So we were asked by them whether we would go over and set this culture of low threshold within Ireland, and we agreed. My trustees, who are very much immersed in this idea of Vincentian values, we use it as the basis for all of our decisions, said, well, look, is it the poorest of the poor? Yeah. Is it action rather than words about this? We said yes. Is it taking risks on behalf of the poor? We said yes. So we went over there, sent some of our best staff, opened up in an empty army barracks in the centre of Dublin, put 50 beds up. We were filled within 24 hours of opening it, and nobody died of cold that winter. Yeah, and that's a positive kind of impact. And not only that, the politicians saw not only did nobody die, the level of begging decreased in the city centre of Dublin dramatically as a result of this. The level of crime and low-level assault dropped in Dublin dramatically. The police were referring people with real problems into this centre where they could be dealt with. The number of people entering detox rose within this period of time. So they said, would we do it permanently? Would we stay in Ireland? Would we develop our services? So I said, well, we can't just have one project 500 miles away. If we're going to stay, we need to do other things as well. So they said, well, look, we've got we've got other things that people don't want to do. Would you be interested in thinking about them? So we began to examine other areas that people didn't want to do. The big one was very hardened street drinkers, working, some of them living on the streets of Dublin, Belfast for upwards of 23 years, never been inside in 23 years. And the reason was that they weren't allowed to drink indoors, so they wouldn't go indoors. So we all sat down and said, well, look, let's rethink this. Rather than say, you can't come into this building if you drink, why don't we say you can't come into this building unless you drink? So turn the logic on its head and say, we're only inviting drinkers into this project, and that we will allow them to drink, but in a very managed way. So the concept is a wet shelter. And the idea is that you take people, as I say, at that non-judgmental level, and that people move through a process of coming in. They can drink in the communal areas, they can drink in their rooms, but we measure every bit of alcohol that they have. If you like, the staff room is the bar where they come and order their drinks. We measure it. But on staff, we've got nurses, we've got doctors. People are sleeping. People get 3 meals a day. People start to get their medications right. People start to become more rational, and gradually they emerge from the fog, hopefully, into something that leads them on a journey where they move through the building into drier areas and then out into dry areas. And some people never get past that first stage.
Yeah.
Some people never get, but they die. If they do die, and some people do with this because of their liver conditions or whatever, they don't die on the street. They die in a place where they're warm, where they're cared for, where people are looking after them. So this idea of again, low threshold and responding to the real needs that are out there.
Yeah, when I was working for Depaul USA, I had a trip to Dublin, and everyone kept saying to me, of course, oh, you've been to Ireland, what was it like? And I said, well, I had an interesting visit because I went to the wet shelter in Dublin, in Belfast.
Yes.
We went to Belfast as well.
Stella Maris.
Yes, and I thought, well, I went to wet shelters, and I was with a woman from the South, Kay Gerhardt, who's on the board still, and she said, never. It never happened in the United States. We could never let, this wouldn't work. And I kept thinking, oh, if only we could be as creative, because I think it would work. I think it was the most fascinating place I had ever been. I just thought, this makes perfect sense. Makes absolutely perfect sense. But anytime anyone asks me about what I saw in Dublin, I have to explain the situation, because I didn't quite see the Dublin other people see. But I saw the Dublin a daughter of charity would want to see.
Yeah, that's the story of my life. I don't normally see tourist attractions. I normally visit homeless shelters.
That's right.
But no, I mean, the great thing about doing this was we expanded the reach of Depaul outside of young people into more specialist services. We then start to realise that actually that's probably what our job is to look at people who aren't being served. So let's let there are so many poverties out there. There are so many different ways that we just have to be flexible to all of them. So we began to expand into families who'd been bombed out because of sectarian violence in the north of England, people leaving prison, how they would step down from that, people with maybe criminal mental health records, how do you accommodate these people? So groups that would otherwise be excluded. And our reputation grew. We decided that now we had Depaul UK and Depaul Ireland, that we needed to have a parent company for the group that could oversee anything that we did, and Depaul International was created. And I moved from being Chief Executive of England and Ireland to being the Group Chief Executive, hence the grand title. All you've got to do to get a grand title is stay in the same place for a long time, and you're absolutely fine. And then we began to think then about the dynamics within the Vincentian family, and it's a curious dynamic within the Vincentian family, that in a sense, in some parts of the world, there's a perceived, whether it's true I don't know, decline in numbers of religious orders, or in the capacity to be able to respond. And I'm very conscious then that Depaul and other agencies that the daughters in the Vincentian family have formed have a kind of responsibility to think about how they preserve legacy. How do they work with? And I'm not saying, by the way, you're all dead in the water. You know, I think that the vocations can come and go over centuries.
I agree.
But I think that it does behold us to be responsible in thinking, how do we preserve those great works of charity, and how do we keep them Vincentian in their charism?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the family.
Yeah.
Is that families are made up of all different kinds of members.
Yes.
It's not just all mothers, it's not just all fathers, it's not just all their children, but it's aunts and uncles and cousins and third cousins and fourth cousins. And you see the way a family spreads, but there is a common DNA that kind of seeps into all of it, and your recognition of yourself as a Vincentian is often, as we said in the beginning, that you've stepped up to act, and then in that action you came in contact with people who said, now how have you seen Christ in the poor? How have you seen that ministry become something bigger than that initial act? I think that shows up so much in Depaul. It shows up in so many other, like the St. Vincent de Paul Society, the Ladies of Charity.
True.
When you look at all of these things, you say, from this one seed of St. Vincent and St. Louise has grown a family tree that's so diverse, because poverty is so diverse.
Yeah,
it happens everywhere.
And it speaks, interestingly, to people of other faiths and no faith at all. I mean, there is something here about almost pre-evangelism that rooted in the Vincentian charism. I mean, as I say, people get involved in action, they meet like-minded people, and they start to reflect. You know, they start to reflect on things, and it leads to there's an enormous amount of loyalty and real active work within Depaul to preserve and build on our values and on our foundations. And 80% of our staff will come from non-Catholic, non-faith backgrounds. They're usually the ones that are most active. Most Catholics like ourselves sit at the back of church, don't we? So these are the people who sit at the front and try and do things. So I'm deeply encouraged. But I don't want to give a negative picture either. So there's these things. There's these areas of decline, of perceived decline or change that are happening. There's also areas of the world where the Vincentian family is actually actively growing and expanding and whatever. And the question there for Depaul is, how do we respond to the fact that they want to do things? How do we create platforms for them to be able to develop services and learn from each other and learn experiences and grow? So as I see it, we're a bridge as well between knowledge and resource from one side of the globe to another side of the globe. That's what we do, and we help to build other charities around the world. So with that spirit in mind, you know, we looked out into where the Vincentian family was asking us to do some work, and ended up in Slovakia with the daughters and with the Vincentian fathers, intending to just open a very simple shelter for homeless people over a winter with 70 beds, and within 3 weeks we had 250 people in the shelter, and now Depaul Slovakia has grown into the largest homeless charity in Slovakia, serving thousands of people. And a similar story will be said of Ukraine. You know, we went in there as a response to the Vincentian fathers and to the Polish community of the sisters who were working in Ukraine, and the AIC and the SVP as well, and began a collaborative effort around homelessness in Kharkiv on the border with Russia. A very simple minibus that we ripped out the insides, put a little kitchen in it, and said to the AIC, you provide the soup. We said to the daughters, you provide the nursing care. We said to the Vincentian fathers, you provide the drivers. And we said to Depaul, you provide the social work and the money. And created it. And we went out onto the streets. We called it Depaul Outreach. The children called it Depolka, because Depolka in Ukrainian means small white puppy dog. So they rebranded us on the street, and we had a little picture of a puppy on the side of it to speak to them. But from that very small partnership collaboration, you then, and this is where another thing I believe about charity is it appears in front of you the opportunity to do. The need appears in front of you. You know, we get older people knocking on the door of the minibus saying, can I just have some food? So we thought, well, we need to feed older people who are on the streets. And when we started to feed them, we started to recognise their medical problems. So we said we need a medical surgery. And once you start doing the medical surgery, you start to realise they need respite care and accommodation. And once you start doing that, you grow through knowledge of what needs to be done. So now we work with about 8,000 people in Ukraine every year. We then moved to the United States, and I think the United States will probably be our fastest growing charity. I think luckily, in 10 or 12 years times when I'm playing golf somewhere and whoever's doing my job is talking about Depaul, they'll be talking about Depaul USA as the biggest charity in the group, because I think the opportunities, the great can-do attitude of the United States will present it with all kinds of opportunities to do things there, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done there, and not least, Elizabeth, of your part in what we managed to achieve down in Macon and in Little Rock and in other parts of what we did.
They were a delight for me. They were such a privilege to work in those, both Daybreak in Depaul, yes. in Macon, in Jericho Way in Little Rock.
Yeah, well, we miss you, but we'll see you back one day, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
But we went from there to Paris because we were drawn to. We run a values course for all of our staff, which we've developed over the last 15 to 20 years. So we take 15 people to Paris for a long weekend of all faiths, of no faith. We go to the Rue de Bac, we go to the Rue de Sèvres, we walk in the footsteps of Vincent, of Louise, of Frederick. We reflect on our own experience of Vincentian history, our own story of growth, and then we look at how you interpret those values into leadership on the ground. And leaders for me are not just the board, and they're not just the CEOs. Leaders for me are people that sit in a staff meeting and challenge a decision about a person who's been evicted from a project and say, did we give them enough chances? Or who, leaders for me are people that stand up for members of staff who are being bullied. Leaders for me are people who demonstrate leadership. So we focus in on trying to make our values and our foundational documents not just pieces of paper we put on the wall, but things that live and breathe in all of our projects. So our leadership project was there, but every time we went over to Old Saint-Lazare, we'd go in to look at the building, and in the park there, there's the cornerstone from the original Saint-Lazare building, and we'd take our stuff up and get our photo taken, and there'd always be people sleeping just behind that statue. How can it be that all of those years ago Vincent and Louise lived in this neighbourhood, and yet and now all these years later there's homelessness there? So our staff were very keen that we started to make some kind of response in Paris. So we began with the mobile douche unit that goes out providing showers to people. We moved into the day centre that we have now, and then the outreach service we've got. And then our most recent part of what we do is in Croatia, not with the Daughters of Charity, but with an offset of the Daughters of Charity, living and working in Croatia as part of the Strasbourg Federation out in that part of Europe. So a different part of the Vincentian family to do. And this has been the other blessing of my job, is watching over the last 20 years this emergence of the idea of Vincentian family, of watching this idea of many parts, one body, and how you can begin to think about what you do. I think to some extent we've all lived in our own bunkers for too long. This was my objective criticism of it. If Vincent and Louise were alive today, do you think they'd allow that to happen? I think not. I think that they would be thinking about how we use our gifts, our assets, our experience to do the best we can for the poor globally. I think that's where we'd be, and I think that the opening of the Vincentian Family Office has been an enormous step forward in thinking about how we maybe share training and how we think about systemic change. And then the most recent thing that I'm managing on behalf of the Vincentian family is the Family Homeless Alliance, which has lots of ambitions to try and change policy within the UN and the EU around homelessness, to think broadly about not just street homeless people, but about refugees, about internally displaced beings, about slum dwellers, to think about our encounters with those people in a really meaningful way, and try and learn from them and share that experience across the family. But again, because we're not just something based in reflection, that our charism is about action, the idea is that Vincent himself, with the help of the daughters and Louise, of course, because he never did anything without them really, but with those help, the fact that he thought about taking this work with the foundlings in Paris, and then thought, well, how do I institutionalize this? How do I make this last beyond just the founding personalities? And to go out and say, well, the King Louis XIII has just left me $1 million. Let's take the $1 million and let's buy 13 houses.
Right.
Let's write a rule that gives a quality control on what we're going to do, and then let's get the cheapest workforce we can, called the Daughters of Charity, to go in there and manage these projects on our behalf. But I say to our staff all the time, you're not part of a 30-year-old charity. You're part of a 400-year tradition.
Yeah.
There is nothing we do now across Depaul that Vincent and Louise weren't doing 400 years ago.
And I think to your earlier point that we sometimes see each member of the family, and I love that image of we're parts of the whole body, that some parts grow very quickly, some parts diminish over time. It's the aging process as well. Things change. And so just because there may be fewer Daughters of Charity than there were before doesn't mean that the way we see and the way we live the charism, our lifestyle, is not obviously as valuable. Of course it is. But that somehow, because there aren't as many of us, it somehow is diminished. And I think I've realized over the years as a Daughter of Charity that the way in which we allow the charism to grow on its own and not hold it like somehow we have, or the Vincentian priests or the St. Vincent de Paul Society have the answer. We are the real part of the charism. So we hold on to it and we don't let it grow, but rather to let it be as organic as it was in the very beginning. Because St. Vincent, founded a group of priests and a group of sisters and the Ladies of Charity. He didn't just stop with religious communities. He didn't just stop with what was right in front of him, but saw that what was right in front of him was much bigger and wider than. So I always love the idea of Depaul International. That the name is really what we all are. We're around the world. Yeah. We are completely international. And how that's lived out, how that charism continues to spread, is really the legacy of St. Vincent and St. Louise. Yeah. Those very simple beginnings in Paris to address the needs of what was right in front of them.
No, I mean, in a sense, I claim no credit for Depaul International, and neither do my trustees, and neither do our directors. The credit belongs to the Vincentian family. I mean, somehow all of those disparate parts of the charism came together and created us, and actually, thank God, we didn't lose that. We didn't drift into just moving into a kind of like more secular view of things. We tried to keep that reflective heart of Depaul being around the charism, and to do that is intentional. You can't do this by accident. We make sure that every single one of our governance bodies has, by law, by legal thing, has to have a representative from the Daughters of Charity, the Vincentian Fathers, the SVP, and any other member of the Vincentian family working in that country, because they're our values director. And what's at the heart of why Depaul works and is functional is those values and keeping them close and safeguarding. And my hope is that in the same way that Vincent demonstrated and Louise demonstrated 400 years ago, that through that charism, through that intentionality of action, action on the basis of my spirituality, we can do something great for the poor. That our hope is that metaphorically, not literally, but metaphorically, we can build those 13 houses for homeless people in 151 countries around the world. And it might be houses in one place, it might be a day centre in another, it might be a welcoming centre for refugees in another place. But the fact is that is the capability of the Vincentian family. It's hard to believe that with this 2 million membership that we have of the Vincentian family at the moment, on the back of an envelope, as I was investigating the Family and Homeless Alliance, I started to jot down the kind of resources that the Vincentian family globally spends.
Yes.
This is not just ours, this is just money. It's over $1 billion a year that the Vincentian family is investing just in homeless services globally. If that's true, then the Vincentian family is already, as well as being a group of religious organisations, lay organisations with a great vocation at the heart of it, it's also one of the largest charities in the world.
Right,
yeah?
right.
And
when you combine it.
When we combine it.
Yeah.
And I think this is what speaks to the third part of the equation, and Osnum is that, you know, with Vincent and Louise, you've got this great kind of like a platform for which to inspire people to action. And with Osnum, you also got the way that you translate that into how you change structures around the world, how you impact structures. And I think there's the trinity for me of how you, on the basis of your spirituality, you lead to action, and action leads to advocacy. And Depaul International is hoping that we'll kind of grow in that voice, but we're not the answer to everything. All we are is a platform for the Vincentian family to show what it does around the world. We have a spiritual way, and I quite like the way we are with people, the way we listen, and as you say, the way that we, you know, this idea of the poor are our masters. I think is a really great starting point for how you reflect on your work with the poor.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we try to do that all the time, and then realize, oh, this is really hard. This is hard, you know. So I just can't thank you enough for spending time with me today, and just hearing this story again really helps me. And Daughters of Charity often talk about two things. Our first place of belonging is in the company, and that so many things bring back our first fervor, that reason we realized that this was the place we needed to be, that something that spoke within us. And I often call it a DNA. It's a spiritual DNA that says, I am a daughter of St. Vincent. You know, I am a daughter of St. Louise. I'm a daughter of this charism. And you've really helped me kind of bring that back a little bit and say, yeah, this is really amazing. Is there something you would want to tell folks, just one last thing about the charism, about the work?
When I was a young man in those early days at the Passage, and I used to come in for breakfast, I remember one day Sister Barbara asking me to actually open up the Passage with the keys, so that everybody, the volunteers and everybody could put the breakfast on and get the tea ready and everything. And being a young man of 25, 26, I slept in and woke up an hour later than I should have done with the keys in my hand and dashed round here. And of course this was the middle of winter, very cold, and there were hundreds of people still outside waiting for food, and the volunteers were kind of like furious with me for doing it. And I walked in and couldn't apologise enough, but there was a very elderly lady called Bridie who had lots of issues, mental health issues. She wasn't so forgiving, and she was fluent in Anglo-Saxon. Nobody's ever quite sworn as much at me in my life, and threw a pan at me and was absolutely fuming. And I was scared. You know, what we forget is when you meet the poor for the first time, it's quite scary. It's quite a scary encounter the first time around when you meet them. And I remember being stood there thinking, I'll never go back to that, you know. And Barbara came round to my school, had a chat with me, and then for the next 2 weeks, whenever I went into the Passage, she didn't make any big song or dance about it. She just stood quietly, you know, and watched me, introduced me to people, made it all calm. And I thought, that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's about standing alongside people in their journey with the poor.
Yes.
It's about using our experience to kind of like get rid of irrational fears, build bridges, do things. And actually, that's always been an image of the daughters I've carried with me, and it's been an image that I've never been disappointed with in any community I've worked with around the world. So thanks to you guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much for having this time with us, and I loved ending with that story. That was great. Thanks so much, Mark.
No problem. Thank you.
This has been In the Company of Charity podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.